Thank you very much, Annie, and hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel today. As Annie says, I'm Andrew Collinson. I'm Research Director of STL Partners. Before that, I worked in telecoms in an operator for many years, and since then I've been working with operators and others around the world, maybe about the last 15 years as an analyst and as a research director. And it's been my pleasure in that time to get to know a lot of very good analysts, including those on around this call. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, and I'm going to go alphabetical. So I'm going to start with Dean, go to Francisco, and then on to Leo to do a quick introduction. And what I'd like you to do is just say who you are, what you're doing. And we're talking today about 5G, and I'll just set up the agenda to give the guys a chance to think through what they want to say. I'm sure they've thought it through before, but just give them a moment. There are three real things I want to talk about. The first is how important is 5G to telco success? Because the panel's set up as this is, 5G is crucial to 5G to telco success. And I think there's a question, well, is it? How important is it? I think is the question I'd like to explore and debate today. What's different? What's special? What remains special in the offering and the lexicon of 5G? What differences are there regionally or nationally or by segments and sectors? So trying to pan out some of the nuances in where things are important and what's important for whom. And finally, how should operators be thinking about 5G now? Is it differentiator? Is it table stakes? What's it for? What does it really mean? So that's what we're going to spend the next 45 minutes talking about, probably about the next 40 minutes now. So I'm going to hand over to Dean to go first and then pass the baton on to Francisco and Leo to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Andrew. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm Dean Bubley. I'm an industry analyst. I've been an industry analyst for far too long. Some people on the call may recognize my Twitter alter ego of Disruptive Dean, and I do occasionally like to stress test things by throwing rocks at them. 5G, I've been following since day one, and my view has remained consistently that it is just another G, despite the hype around whether it's the core network being service architecture based or anything else. It's an important upgrade, but it is not changing either the business model of operators, and it's certainly not changing society. And some of the hype you see about billions and trillions, hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars of GDP, I think you can take a very large grain of salt. I think an important aspect of 5G is that it's phased, and that today's 5G for most operators, frankly, is 4G plus. And it's going to take several years to get to the good stuff with release 16, 17, 18 of 5G, and especially with decent coverage. People talk about ubiquitous coverage. Well, the first question you have to ask is, will it work indoors or in remote areas? And mostly the answer is no.
Okay, Dean, this is an introduction. So okay. I want to congratulate you on introducing the entire panoply of 5G. And I'd just like to say hi, this is Dean. I've worked with him for a number of years, so you may find me talking in this kind of way a lot. Francisco, if I can get you to do an introduction, and please don't feel you need to introduce the whole of 5G.
Okay, so good morning, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay, good. So my name is Francisco Fontes. I'm a senior researcher and a consultant at Altice Labs. So Altice Labs is the main research and development center for the Altice group, so international group that operates all around the globe, or more in Europe and the United States, but also in some other geographies. We Altice Labs, we produce products for the group, but also to outside the group. And we existed before Altice acquired us. So we have a large presence in Brazil, for instance, in Africa, so in other geographies. So from connectivity to BSS, OSS systems, including TV and ELs, so just to give you some example of what we do. Personally, I'm focusing in networking aspects, and in particular in 5G, edge computing, and the network virtualization, being responsible for a team that addresses these topics and push these into other business units where the products are made or evolved. So that's my main role in the company.
Thank you, Francisco. Leo.
Yes, and last but not least, I'm Leo Gergs. I'm a senior analyst at ABI Research, looking really at what we call the 5G the monetization aspect of 5G. And in that context, I'm looking at the consumer domain to some extent. and the enterprise opportunity, and specifically looking at how the role of carriers in the changing competitive landscape with system integrators, hyperscalers, and infrastructure vendors that continue to play some role, at least in that, right?
Thank you, Leon. May I congratulate you on your kind of pre-Raphaelite look on the screen, which is quite remarkable. So just want to say thank you for joining us from the Netherworld. It's a great pleasure to have you here. So anyway, here we have the esteemed panel, and what we're here to talk about is 5G. So my first question to you is how important, so the premise is 5G is essential to telco success. Well, obviously it's important. It's a network thing. Telcos are network operators, but how important? And I'll put that in context and say maybe 2 or 3 years ago, it was right at the woo spectrum of things. 5G was a very unknown, exciting, new horse at the race kind of thing. I don't think it's that now, but I think it varies in different places. That's in terms of how it's seen as the sparkliness of 5G, if you like. But how important is it to telco success? I'm just going to chuck it open and say you've all got to jump in. How important is it to telco success now? And what's different and what's special? So don't just say, oh, no, it's rubbish or no, it's all great. I want to know what's important about it and what's not important about it. Over to you guys.
I'd say it's correlation rather than causation. Yeah, if telcos are successful or not successful, it's largely likely to happen in the 5G era. So trying to untease what's specifically attributable to 5G is going to be quite hard, with a few exceptions. Maybe fixed wireless access is the outlier. Okay, so Dean, fixed wireless access, possible outlier, correlation, not causation. Leo, Francisco, your thoughts?
Okay, so I'm representing the operator, and of course, I have to say that 5G is relevant for the operator, at least for the operators operating in the mobile market. So it is the evolution what the operators have, and they need to have 5G to keep on the race. But my understanding is that the 5G brings some new features and increased performance that are two crucial aspects to answer the growing demand for more bandwidth for new features. And 5G was meant from the beginning to go beyond the B2C market and to address the B2B. So 5G, not the 5G we have yet at the moment, but the future 5G, as Dean was saying, so release 17, release 18, when it will be available and operating. So it will bring some features. And for me, the relevant features are the ones that will help the operators and the entities providing and supporting 5G in the private market, in the companies, to do their business. And it is, for me, reliability and latency. So the features that will help implementing control systems and very sensitive crucial systems in the factory floor, for instance, and other applications. So it's not exactly the bandwidth or more mobility, but the features that answer those use cases the industry is searching for solutions, of course, supported by this dedicated spectrum. I think that's also an advantage of 5G. When operating in dedicated spectrum is the guarantee that the network will operate with that low latency and reliability that the most valuable use cases will require.
Thank you, Francisco. That's good. So you're saying it's about capacity and economics to begin with, and potentially when you go to release 17 or 18. Can someone remind me when that's supposed to be, by the way? When's 17, 18?
17 has been frozen, right?
Yeah, in standards. Well, but
it is in standards. But we've seen what happens with the device ecosystem with release 16, which has been frozen for 2 years now, right?
Okay, so we don't really know. So in other words, relevant features that we don't really know when.
I would say in public networks, mobile operators, probably release 17, 3 to 4 years is reasonable, maybe a bit sooner in private or localized networks. And to be honest, you might see bits and pieces for individual features done earlier.
So you think 2026, 25, 26 for private networks, 27, 8 for public?
Maybe a bit sooner, but yeah, anything vary a lot.
Okay, so Leo, I want to give you a time on a question. So how important, what's important, why is it special?
It is I would distinguish the two aspects, right, of what the opportunity is versus what's probably the more realistic scenario. Because having seen what's been happening so far with 5G and communication of 5G towards industry, I come to concur with Dean. I hate agreeing, because disagreement often provides better discussions, right? But I come to agree with Dean that it's more correlation rather than causation.
Don't worry, I'm sure we can find things to disagree with Dean about. Don't you worry.
I know that, right? But yeah, so the opportunity, I mean, and this brings me to what Francisco has said. The great opportunity, I think, with 5G was, or the great promise of that 5G brought to operators and carriers was, oh yeah, you can bridge. It was a technology that would have allowed operators to bridge the gap and go explore new markets beyond the B2C opportunity. Because that, I mean, look at the average revenue per user that all of the carriers are reporting in the consumer market. It's not looking particularly impressive, to say the least. Yes, 5G has managed to stop the decline in ARPU, but has not the additional services in the additional 5G services in the consumer domain have not really resulted, at least for now, in this humongous uptake that everyone was hoping.
Okay, well, let's dig into a couple of things here. Okay, so there's two things that stand out here. One is Dean, I think, highlighted fixed wireless access as a potentially, not exactly a game changer, but an important difference that 5G provides. And the other one that I think you've all alluded to, that Francesco brought up, is this idea that there are advanced features in advanced releases, which, Leo, you're talking about here, about how you bridge the gap to kind of more B2B to X type applications in 5G. Now, so the questions about those things are, okay, let's talk about them separately. Let's talk about fixed wireless access first, and then come back to the enterprise space. So question about fixed wireless access, how important, where?
Varies by country, depending on fiber incumbency to a large extent. So it's likely to be, so if I'm looking at Italy, parts of the US, maybe Japan, maybe the UK, perhaps Germany, important in places like Singapore, and probably Spain and France less.
What are the characteristics of the places that
yeah. What is slow on fiber rollout is probably, and the UK now is accelerating, but there was a really interesting talk yesterday about Nordics, I think it was Finland, where you get incumbency effects, where if people start deploying fiber, then there's a path dependency effect and it starts getting lock-in, people invest more, customers are used to it, and then fixed wireless becomes a secondary or tertiary option. Or vice versa. And some markets seem to be fixed wireless primary, notably Nordics.
So, yeah,
okay. I agree with it, yeah.
So any disagreement with Dean's assessment of fixed wireless? So it's important in places where...
yes, that's our experience from the Altice group, yes. So we don't see many traction for the fixed wireless access because we're operating in, well, maybe with the exception of France, we are in markets where the fiber, it has a strong presence, like in Portugal, for instance. So no one discuss about fixed wireless access because all the operators are deploying lots of fiber to every home. In many places, we have overlapping fiber networks in the access.
Thank you. Okay, so I think and in terms of impact, it's very difficult to say how much difference is it going to make. But Dean, we did some work on this a little while ago, I think, where we talked about where we thought it might be. I mean, I can't remember what we said the answer was, but it was. Can you remember what we thought?
I think it was
got numbers?
It was sort of up to about 10% of homes. It's essentially 5G pretty much doubles the addressable market that we've had from fixed wireless in the past with 4G and sort of various sort of Wi-Fi type technologies. So, which is good. If you're a fixed wireless provider, it's probably doubled your addressable market, but it might be going from 5% to 10% or 3% to 6%. So you have to view it in context.
Yeah. Okay. Any other contribution to the fixed wireless access pot? No. Okay. Well, let's move on to the more contentious issue, I think, of how it adds value to enterprise. And what we're talking about here, I think, to a degree, I think, Leo, you talked about it being the great opportunity to bridge a gap. And Francisco, you were talking about release 17, the relevant features of reliability and latency and control. Can we talk about that? I mean, how big a difference? So actually, I'm going to start with you, Leo, because I know you've been looking at private networks quite a lot. I know Dean has too. So let's talk about this. How big a difference does 5G actually make to private networks?
I think in the future, in long term, I think standalone can make a difference, right? And my short answer to your question would, at the moment, probably not so much, because we're seeing on all of the deployments that we're seeing so far, or most of them, really are on non-standalone. And then it's becoming a bit of a difficult question, or it's becoming a bit of a difficult picture what 5G really brings in non-standalone. To my understanding, and this is also when I talk to enterprises, industrial enterprises specifically, is that they're using, or the main value, the important value proposition of that 5G brings at this point in time is just a bigger data pipe to transmit existing automation protocols. Think in industrial manufacturing, think, for example, Profinet. Siemens is using 5G predominantly, or pretty much only at this point in time, to transmit Profinet. Other industrial players as well. And I think this is really the realistic scenario that we're facing at the moment, at least from an enterprise demand point of view.
So it attracts interest. I mean, there's no doubt into my mind that 5G has attracted interest from enterprise and others in the marketplace, but it doesn't really, at this point, add too much of a differentiation apart from a bit of extra capacity. Francisco, is that what you were going to say?
Yes, at the moment, yes, we are seeing some traction from companies, so they are interested in 5G. But I would say that I agree with Leo that in non-standalone, that just brings more bandwidth. So, and that's is more relevant for the consumer market, not so much for the industry market, because if the industry wants to have bandwidth, so they have alternative technology. So I think that the big, even with the non-standalone, well, we still have the guaranteed spectrum that guarantees more things that Wi-Fi does with this shared spectrum. But I agree with Leo that it is with standalone that we really are able to take the benefits of 5G with the new features. And slicing is maybe to emphasize. I wouldn't say slicing is a very relevant differentiated factor for 5G, but I think this performance again in latency and reliability that allowed the enterprises to substitute other technologies, other wireless and wired technologies, and simplify the factory floor. That's where the value is. So it must be an iterative process where things happen little by little with investments from the operators, investments from the companies, revenues start also to appear, and new features will be implemented by the vendors. And so it's going to be I wouldn't say a long process, but an iterative process during the next years.
Okay. Dean, would you add anything? Disagree?
There's a couple of things. I think 5G brings a couple of things. One is more uplink in most cases, even with non-standalone, which is useful because a lot of the enterprise use cases are actually video cameras, where the balanced traffic is mostly up from the camera to the network. So that's one sort of area where it does make a difference. The other thing is that there's certain countries for private networks where the spectrum that's been made available for enterprises you can only get used for 5G. There aren't any 4G products that run in millimeter wave, or the UK's 3.8 to 4.2 gigahertz band, for example. So it's 5G or nothing. One important thing here, though, is to distinguish between public networks, like a typical MNO network, and then a dedicated private network. And there's a fundamental disconnect between offering public networks on private property, and especially indoors or on campus on private property for enterprises. So you then get in a question of whose responsibility is it to put the infrastructure, to own the assets, to invest in them, on what networks, on what basis. And if a company, if an enterprise is going to be having to have an indoor dedicated 5G radio system, they might as well own it if they can, rather than pay per transaction.
How big do you need to own it? How big do you need to be to do that, do you think?
Varies by country. In theory, I could apply to Ofcom for a spectrum license and get a small cell and a core running on a shoebox-sized server here if I knew what to do with it. I'm not sure in urban areas whether I can get some of the spectrum bands. And I actually think that over time we're going to end up with much smaller private networks. But it's, there's certainly a number of small ones. Interestingly, historically, there were private 2G and 3G networks that were very small in UK, Netherlands, and Japan. So there's a bit of history here. Yeah, this stuff isn't new. It's been around for 15 to 20 years.
A few months ago, there was, maybe longer than months, there was the Amazon, I think it was sort of almost like a 5G in a box thing. I don't know what's happened to that. Has anyone heard any more about that?
It is available on the US market, as far as I know, in the CBRS spectrum.
Yes.
Yeah. And currently it's mostly in a sort of pilot phase. They're looking at other markets. I saw someone from Amazon present at an event last week, and the UK is like on the candidate list, and probably other places in Europe like Germany. There's a few other sort of cloud-based private network as a service options emerging, so Cisco's talked about it, and sort of Microsoft, Google is acting more as an enabler, but we can expect there to be a bunch of private 5G as a service offerings over the next couple of years.
Okay, yeah. And that sort of relates to that leads down the slicing route to an extent, but let's come back to slicing in a minute. Leo, you were about to say something.
No, I mean, there are a couple of things I wanted to say. And in addition to Dean, yes, I think owning or enterprises will be looking at owning their own infrastructure, particularly when they address or when they use the network for mission critical or even life critical use cases. You don't want to outsource your production or your communication infrastructure. Even with that in mind, there is an important vacuum at the moment that we're seeing in the market. None of these, even though most of these companies want to own the infrastructure, none of them, or increasing amount of them, realizes that operating and managing that network is far from being a no-brainer. So there is demand for a third party to take over this network management and network operation. Interestingly, the carriers, or the traditional carriers at least, are not really stepping up to this, and are not really seen as an enabler or as a party to take over this, right?
I'll disagree with you on that, Leo. I think the carriers are, but I think it's their enterprise and their systems integration business units, rather than, if you like, the public network mothership. So, for example, you've got Verizon Business, which operates in countries where Verizon Wireless isn't present, is doing private 5G.
That is true.
And so I think that there will be that role of service providers, but it's their enterprise units rather than the main national network. And often they'll have different vendors even and different solutions.
That is true.
Yeah,
that's true. In addition to that, Dean, I would say that when you look at the operator business units, it seems that their value proposition, or their communicated value proposition, still centers around licensed spectrum assets. In the short term, I think that still holds to some extent, but I mean, long term, the bargaining with spectrum liberalization initiatives rising. We've seen India recently doing somewhat of a U-turn, right? That bargaining power will gradually, if anything, will gradually diminish and will gradually decrease, right? So I think it's time for the operator arms of carriers to center around their network management and operation capabilities more than on stressing their licensed spectrum asset.
Yeah, that's where I may add something, because, well, I present here the operator, and at least we in Altice Labs, and me personally, and the company. So I am pushing that since a long time, that we have a great opportunity for doing new business in the private networks, be it standalone or even in PNI, so private network supported in the operator 5G network, but especially for the standalone ones. So, but that's not just a question of having the right partners to deploy the network and the radio and having the spectrum. So it's a much more complex ecosystem that we have to be prepared for. So for instance, we also develop OSS and BSS systems for the Altice group and outside, and we are evolving our products to be able to address this private network, because it's not just now, as it is now, looking into a single huge network, but looking into many smaller networks. So, and then providing the customers with the ability to see how the network are operating. And also take benefit of the experience we have, and have, even if the customer owns the network, maybe doesn't have to operate it and manage it. So I think the operators can bring here the expertise and the experience they have and the tools they have that need to be evolved, and add value on that.
So okay, so I want to come back to some other things, but I'll just try and summarize here. So broadly, what we're saying in terms of this space is there are a variety of offerings and models that are evolving that potentially require operators to apply different types of skills to the equation to win business, if they want to do it or if they can do it. And it's not just operators. There are many other players who can operate in this space. So as you said, Francisco, there's an ecosystem. So it's working about how do you play in an ecosystem where there are different models of providing a private network type solution to a customer. So I want to cycle back a little bit. We were talking about earlier in the conversation, we were talking about relevant features of 5G and where it becomes special, what becomes special about it. So Francisco, you mentioned reliability and latency. I've looked at the questions, by the way, there's a couple there, and thank you very much, Medad and John Christoph. Anyone else who wants to put them in, please type them in the messaging box under Q&A. I'm going to come to John Christoph's question a bit later, which is about pricing. But we'll come to that in a minute. Medad raised the question of time-sensitive networking in Release 16, and I think you were talking about reliability and latency, Francisco. So the question I want to talk about, so I'll just try to seed your minds with the sort of things we're talking about here. When do these how interesting and how differentiating are these factors to enterprises about operations? And I think we are talking mainly enterprises here, because we haven't really talked about the M word yet, the metaverse thing. We haven't really, when we were preparing for this, and you're all laughing, we haven't really talked about it. I mean, there is a gamers segment. I think we kind of, in a pre-conversation about this, we said, yes, it is interesting, but a lot of gaming is take place in a different context. There are some applications that are around things like Stadia and things like that, which are quite interesting for 5G, I think, which we haven't really touched on, and we've probably not got time to discuss because they really do go into some, quite interesting and different areas. But I want to talk about these functionalities: reliability, latency, time sensitivity. How differentiating are they really, and where do they matter? I can see Dean shaking his head, so I'm going to go to you last, because you've got to go, no. I want to hear the argument for. Make the argument that these are good capabilities. Someone. Leo, Francisco? You mentioned latency, reliability. Medad mentioned time sensitivity. So there's this idea that the increased responsiveness of the network. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so currently these time-sensitive networks are supported in wired network. It is it's based on Ethernet, predictive Ethernet. I would say I'm missing the right word. And now the objective is to substitute this cabled manufacture the industry, the shopping floor for wireless technologies. And for also wireless energy, in order for the manufacturer to be easily reconfigured and everything is movable, etc. And so on, to substitute those wired connectivity. So the new wireless need to have that characteristic. So low latency, reliability, guaranteed spectrum, etc. And as far as I see, there is some appetence for that. Some industries, and we are working with some in here. So they are looking for how feasible this is, how efficient it is. So some use cases are running. Still, we are missing terminals. We are missing applications. For the moment, we are starting to have the connectivity, but we need more components to appear in the market, and all the machines need to be prepared for that. But this is again a process. That iterative process is starting now.
Leo?
Yeah, I would add to Francisco's point. Or I would stress reliability and add availability as key components. I think they're to some extent even more important than latency, as long as latency is predictable, right? Because if you look at where 5G will potentially play in the broader scheme or the broader picture of enterprise connectivity technologies, look at Wi-Fi, look at Bluetooth, it will be the highly critical application where cellular connectivity and specifically 5G will probably excel over other technologies. And in these ones, what you need to have is high reliability and availability, because you don't want, for example, to compromise on worker safety or on your whole mission, on your whole business mission, if the network breaks down. I think those are important capabilities to look at. But what has created I think, some sort of disappointment within the enterprise community is an unrealistic communication of when these features become available, right? I think what has happened, and this is what you particularly hear when you talk to the small and medium-sized enterprises, is that they're now realizing that, oh yeah, 5G allegedly is here because everyone talks about it and operators are talking about the great advantages or the great emergence of 5G now. We all have 5G in our networks. But they realize now that, hang on, this is not the sort of 5G that we've been promised, right?
Okay. Dean, you were going, no, basically.
There's a couple of things. First thing is, Leo's absolutely right. The issue is the industry has been, for example, comparing old versions of Wi-Fi with future versions of 5G. And Wi-Fi isn't standing still either. So Wi-Fi 7 also has time-sensitive networking capabilities and will probably come out 1 to 2 years earlier than release 17, which is when it probably gets commercialized in 5G. It's perhaps because it's in unlicensed spectrum, maybe not have quite the reliability. But one of the issues with reliability is the second half of that word is liability. And the issue is that very few public operators are prepared to take SLAs and legal liability. If the robot kills someone, is it the telco's CEO in court or the manufacturers? And whenever I ask, I haven't seen anyone going, yes, Your Honour, I'll be in the dock as the guilty party if there's a problem. And I think that's an issue. One thing we haven't talked about, we don't have time now, as well as time sensitivity. Later versions of 5G have some quite good location and positioning capabilities, but that's sort of mostly for the future. So you can sort of perhaps have fine-grained, we're within 10 centimeters. There's lots of ways of doing location, but that's another potential feature. The other last one we've talked about, there's some specific enhancements for things like vehicle to infrastructure and V2V. You might have enterprise applications too. Okay,
I'm going to pick up standalone versus non-standalone now, because we have covered a little bit of the geographical differences as we've gone. So I'm going to kind of focus on where we've got to. Jean-Christophe's question was, will operators be able to charge a price premium for the standalone version of 5G? That was the question. Any views?
Well, my understanding is that the 5G shouldn't be charged. Should be charged for the type of service that will be provided. If you look into the business, into the enterprises, so if you are coming again to the reliability and low latency, so if that's what we are selling, so that's the service, the type of connectivity we are provided, that should be charged, not if it is based on NSA or on SA. So currently in non-standalone, we are going to provide, or we are able to provide more bandwidth, and maybe the current business models for that is still based on speed.
So maybe the answer is to these questions is related. Maybe you can charge more if you take liability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I would go a bit away from charging NS or standalone itself or standalone services as a name, but rather look at the applications, right?
Yeah.
I think
so
it's
the problems that you solve, the problem that you solve, and how well you solve that problem will determine what you can, what you should charge. And if you think about it, my view is that price is, a very, is one component of your overall deal with the customer. And what the customer wants is value in that relationship. And if you're delivering value in such a way that they appreciate that value, then the technology is irrelevant, providing it delivers that value.
The other issue is that some of the things that standalone brings are going to be very driven by, I'm sorry to harp on about it, coverage. And so you can't say, here's your special package for gamer mobile broadband, asterisk will not work on the train or in your basement. And you're still expected to spend an extra $5 a month on it. And it's like, it won't work here, it won't work there. It might work in the forest or on the beach if you're very lucky. Who's going to pay for that?
I think we're dangerously in danger of being in violent agreement about this. But I think what we're saying is, if I come back to the overall question, because we've got about 5 minutes left, I think, or thereabouts. But the question was, is 5G critical to telco success? Answer, not exactly. It's related, it's important. Fundamentally, at the heart of this is it's not really about technology. It's about how you solve problems for customers, which problems, and what value you create in the solution of that equation. So, and one of the things that's come out here is, well, okay, that's great. There's some great features, reliability, latency, but do customers care about this? They do, but the reason they're asking for it is because they want an outcome, and the coverage because they want an outcome. They want to be able to do things within a certain range. They want to be able to do it without killing people. They want to be able to do it within certain economics. So fundamentally, what it feels to me like, there's a big disconnect between what 5G is talking about and what customers want. So it's an interesting, wacky thing, it's not so wacky now, but there's some potentially quite interesting things in here. So I've tried to encapsulate what we've just said, but I want to conclude with something. How real is the danger that what operators are going to come to the market with is going to be too little, too late? Because if release 17, 18, which carries some of the sort of interesting stuff, is on hold, and there is no clear, but we think it might be 3 or 4 years away, and enterprises are already disappointed in that what the 5G they've been sold is not the 5G they thought they were going to get, and Wi-Fi standards are improving. You can put wires to things. And by the way, it's quite difficult if you're trying to create for example, a connected factory or connected mine. It's difficult. You've got 50-year-old equipment. You've got different software systems. There's stuff to do. And it seems to me like operators aren't moving quick enough to put, this is hypothesis. This sounds very accusatory, but to kind of create drama, that operators are not moving quick enough to put in place the business model support that they need for this, the integration that they need to deliver services, to manage networks as opposed to deliver spectrum. And the process itself is not moving quick enough to deliver something to market. And so there's a hypothesis. Is that true? Is that a real danger? Will they miss out?
I don't think so. But it is not a question of the operators not being prepared. I think that there is not enough products in the industry, in core and terminals and radios that support these new features. So we have to wait for that. In the meanwhile,
I wasn't trying to blame the operators.
Yeah,
I think the operators are part of that, in their capabilities, but the equipment's not there. The functionality is not available. The coverage is not there. If I was an enterprise, why would I build it on 5G? I'm going to go and do it with Wi-Fi or a wire or Bluetooth or something. Why would I do it? I'm being devil's advocate here, but I'm trying to get that answer from you guys.
I think it's going to be very company, country, and application specific. And if you want to be an operator and narrow down and just deliver stuff that you are constrained to, what you can do now with 5G, with your network and the software version and the staff, the resources and supply chain, all the rest of it, then you will have a limited addressable market. If you come from the point of view of saying, I want to sell connected solutions to manufacturing and retail and military and entertainment, then you have to be network independent, and you basically sell the right tool for the right job. Sometimes it's 5G, whether it's standalone or at least 15, 16, 17, 18. Sometimes it's Wi-Fi, sometimes it's satellite, sometimes it's fiber. But you have to start and say, no, we're going to be the connected manufacturing specialist and not try to say, well, 5G is a hammer. I'm going to go around looking for nails.
Okay. Francisco, Leo, I think we're very close to concluding, so please, your conclusions.
And I mean, in addition to what Dean said, I think there's still a bit to do in terms of adapting to a different sales process, especially when you look at operator arms of telcos, right? Where in the consumer domain or in the consumer market, selling is still a quite one-directional transaction or process where you sell connectivity to a consumer and that's it, done. The enterprise, and I think we touched on this briefly, but the enterprises require a much more consultative approach and essentially something more like an application engineer, where selling the right connectivity technology or the right connectivity solution requires a much more direct bidirectional exchange of enterprise requirements, and then being able to map these enterprise requirements to the different connectivity technologies that you have available in your offering and in your portfolio.
Thank you, Leo. Francisco?
Okay, so I think we'll agree that 5G is a key differentiator, okay, but it must be seen as a piece of a much more complex ecosystem. So, and we all agree that 5G, and as Dean was saying, must be bundled with other access technology, services, and applications. And the operators, for sure, we are not going to be specialists in all the verticals, so we also have to establish partnerships with entities, and also entities will come into the market and also start to get a bit of this market. So it must be seen from different angles. So new service models, new value chain, new ways of charging the service must be think of, and we need to have the right tools for that. And think, when I mean we, it's we, the vendors, the private entities, all must be ready for this. And it is not just a question of having 5G. It's much more complex than that. 5G is just a part of these ecosystems that needs to be prepared, and is being prepared, but will take some time.
Okay. Well, look, I think we set out with the premise that we would explore, how important is 5G, and the answer is, it's pretty useful, and there's some good things about it. But the reality is that the shine exceeded, or the sizzle exceeded the sausage at this point, to this point in the marketplace. And my personal feeling on the back of this call is just to say, I just get this sense that things got to hurry up. That time is passing, and I've seen this a few times before in the industry, that time passes and the operators don't move quickly enough. They're too responsive. And when I say the operators, that's mean. I'm being mean to the operators, and that's not fair. The industry is not moving fast enough. Other things are happening. The world is happening around us, and it just feels like it's not moving quickly enough. That's how I feel about it. Anyone disagree with that?
I think there's a risk in the industry that people go in with a maximalist view of 5G can do everything for everyone, everywhere, and we are going to own the customer all the time and be at the top of that tree. And it takes a few years' time. It's not doing things. It's it takes a couple of years for the reality to set in that that's an unrealistic ambition. And I think that when we get to 6G, which is coming, I think if we can rein in the unrealistic strategic overreach, then there's a much greater chance of success.
So you're saying incremental gains, Dean. So focus on getting stuff done now, move it quickly, get in there, do stuff.
And know when to be, if you like, the supporting cast member rather than the leading actor. Okay.
Francisco, Leo? You seem to both nod at that, which is extraordinary that we all agree with Dean.
Yes, it's extremely unusual, but I think I'd agree with that. Right? Be complacent, or not be complacent, but be realistic. Operators, I think, should be realistic on the role that they would play in the enterprise supply chain, and this might be in conjunction with system integrators who might be leading the deployment and might supply components or expertise into system integrators and be prepared for that as well.
It's not only the operators and the vendors. I think, as you said, all the industry, also the customers, the enterprises, the manufacturers that want to exploit 5G, they also need to prepare and be ready for it. And also they need to think how to take the maximum benefit of the technology. And they also should press their suppliers to be ready for 5G, and they have software, and they have terminals, and they have machines that can connect to 5G and exploit it. So it's not a question of the vendors and the spectrum and the low latency. It's the whole ecosystem. And it is happening. Little by little it is happening. The use cases we are running, and everybody's running 5G use cases. So people are experimenting, are taking conclusions, are identifying the gaps. And I think it is happening. So it takes some time, not a huge time. I think that maybe in 1-2 years, we start seeing real things being commercially exploited, not only for experimenting and evaluating. I think it will happen in next year. We start to see things happening.
Thank you.
I'm not so negative. I'm a bit optimistic about it.
I apologize. I don't mean to come over as negative. What I'm trying to do is create a sense of what is it, where are we, what is it, and what needs to happen. And I think I just get a sense of, I get a feeling that there's a sense of urgency is needed, because I think things may need to go quicker. But Annie, thank you so much. You've appeared back on our screens. Does that mean our time is over?
By magic, yes. Your time is up. That was great fun, really interesting and very informative. I hope we can reprise this a bit further down the line in some form